Let me state at the outset that who you want to date, who you want to marry, who you want to go to bed with is none of my business. It has no impact on my life. This is not an attempt to judge, to criticize, or to correct what you choose to do with your life, or be in your life, or what gender you choose to identify as. This is more about why you feel the need to identify as anything other than what you are. Hopefully, by the end of this, you'll see that most of you who are gender confused are victims of a well thought out and brilliantly executed plan. Facebook lists 58 possible ways a man or a woman chooses to identify with regards to gender. Interestingly enough, almost half of them are relevant to the trans option, only though it comprises a mere 0.6% of the general population. Because I don't believe in coincidence, I should state that the person charged to lead Facebook's gender identity subcommittee, Brielle Harrison, attempted to transition from male to female. What? A gender transition from male to female. Is it me or is there something intuitively not right about that statement? What exactly is a gender transition, if anything at all? Let's define one sex as the physiological, morphological, and biological characteristics that differentiate male from female. You either have male genitalia, female genitalia, or in rare instances, a combination of both called hermaphroditism. In essence, there are three biologically and medically recognized sexes: male, female, and intersex. Interestingly enough, we find this in several dozen plant and animal species. The idea of gender is based primarily on the role a man or a woman will play within the context of any cultural, societal, or familial setting. Gender is about the role one will assume on the cultural stage, not whether or not they are a man or a woman on that cultural stage. I was born in '71 at the height of the women's lib movement, so gender and gender roles was something I was acculturated into via pop culture, primarily through shows, movies, and music. Phrases such as Mr. Mom, or he's a stay-at-home dad, or she's wearing the pants in the family were phrases I both heard frequently and was not offended by. Again, though, the issues surrounding gender when I was growing up had to do primarily with the expected role a man or woman would play, not whether or not they were a man or a woman. So, with that in mind, let's revisit what sort of transition Brielle Harrison is talking about. If the transition were male to female, then he would be going through a sex change operation like Chelsea Manning. However, Brielle states that he is going through a gender transition, which simply means to me that he's a dude who will now begin to act like a chick. For tens of thousands of years, the family construct, with its well-defined gender roles, the archetypal me Tarzan, you Jane, man hunts, protects, provides, while the woman tends to the home and children, has served us quite well. So what changed? Did a shift in the axis of humanity occur, causing mass confusion? Why, in the last nearly 3 generations, have we as a species become confused as to what we are genetically predisposed to do? How did we transition from this to this? What cannot be overlooked is the tremendous influence some of the largest foundations have had on education, medicine, and the social sciences as a whole. They have been studying us for quite some time, and as a result, what arose from their system of institutionalized patronage was a loyal band of social engineers, people who felt as though they had a duty and a right to formulate a society that is most beneficial to them, to foment behavior and thoughts that will adhere and conform to the implementation of a new world order, where the individual is secondary to the group, where there is no ownership, no concept of freedom, or thought, or language. Guess what? It's true. There really are smoke-filled rooms full of leather chairs, half-snifters of brandy, and old men who have ideas that they have the means to implement. Who was the leading voice of the women's liberation movement? At the forefront was Gloria Steinem, who, as we now know, was a paid spokesperson used by the CIA and the Rockefellers. The goal? To create a social movement whose agenda did not arise from any real need for social change. Think George Soros and his funding of Black Lives Matter. But rather from the desire of the Luciferian pedo elite to engineer their idea of a utopic society. In his documentary, Freedom to Fascism, the late Aaron Russo recounts a conversation he had with Nelson Rockefeller. Rockefeller had asked Aaron what he thought about the women's liberation movement, to which Aaron replied it was great, it helped a lot of women. Rockefeller laughed, calling him a fool, and stated that it was his family, through their foundation, who financed the women's liberation movement, and that it had two primary goals. The first was to put women in the workforce in order to create a whole new tax base. The second goal was to remove the child from the family at an earlier age in order to place them into a state-run indoctrination facility, i.e. a school. The more one delves into the mindset of these technocrats, it is apparent that the idea of family is extremely contrary to their Luciferian game plan. In fact, they see it as one of the biggest obstacles they must overcome in order to fully implement a one-world government. Social movements are but one aspect of the social engineering process. There are also the numerous television shows and movies who were instrumental in assimilating the young, fragile eggshell mind. Their third mechanism, but not to be overlooked in its effectiveness to indoctrinate, was, and still is, their control and use of the music industry and its creation of false gods called rock stars, a phrase whose etymology can be referenced to the Tavistock Institute of Behavioral Studies. There is, however, a fourth mechanism. It is pervasive and nearly impossible to avoid. It is tasteless, odorless, and is responsible for altering the biochemistry of humanity. This fourth mechanism of social engineering has been implemented transgenerationally in order to slowly change the human biochemical systems through the prolonged and steady exposure to a group of chemicals called phthalates, which serve to basically plasticize plastic. Try not to touch plastic on any given day. You would find it nearly an impossible task. Given the numerous studies that conclusively indicate the negative consequences of ingesting these chemicals over a prolonged and steady period of time, particularly to the endocrine and hormonal systems, is it any wonder there is confusion? There is certainly enough evidence to more than suggest a causal link between gender confusion and the use of phthalates. The only question that remains is, are these chemicals being weaponized? Is it their intent to create a confused, asexual, emotionally retarded 25-year-old? If so, they have far exceeded their expectations. It certainly goes hand in hand with the depopulation agenda, as well as getting rid of the family unit. By creating a compliant, predominantly effeminate feminist male who is confused about what's between their legs, they have in essence ensured that there will be no violent overthrow of the beast system they are getting very close to implementing. Or, conversely, is the prolonged and steady exposure to these dangerous chemicals and their effects on the human body simply an unintended consequence? Whichever the case may be, it sounds like a win-win for their team, given what their endgame is. So to those who are gender confused, I propose an entirely new category of gender that you may want to consider: the chic gender, or the chemically induced confusion gender. Whether or not you want to acknowledge that there has been an intentional, systemic attack on the family for nearly 3 generations, that they have used every weapon at their disposal to alter the minds and bodies of humans, is entirely up to you and your desire and willingness to seek answers. However, what is clear is that the changes manifesting themselves in present-day society did not happen, as Roosevelt stated, out of a vacuum. Those are my thoughts on the gender issue. If you agree, give it a thumbs up and share. Or if you think I'm an idiot, give it a thumbs down and feel free to leave a comment. Thanks.